Okay, hello everyone. Pleasure to welcome you to our next session on Poland's economic success and lessons for Europe and the rest of the world. My name is Marcin Przydacz, which I will be moderating the discussion. I'm a professor of economics at Kozminski University in Warsaw, and I have a second job at the same time today on leave from the World Bank in New Delhi. I'm a lead economist at the World Bank responsible for South Asia. Before I introduce our panelists, some of the key questions we want to answer today are the following. One, what were the drivers and therefore what are the lessons learned from Poland's economic success? Second, in the new Trumpian Greenland type of the world, and I think all of our panelists are eagerly waiting for President Trump's speech today. Who knows, maybe our discussion will not be relevant anymore. But to what extent the recipe that has allowed for Poland's economic success, openness to trade, to investment, to technology absorption, to the global economic system based on liberal values, to what extent the same economic model will be relevant to make other countries successful in the future. And the third point is, and I guess that will be equally exciting, where do we go from here? In terms of Poland, will it continue to do well, and will it actually be able to build economic muscle that will allow it to actually not only be a champion in catching up with advanced countries, but also be a champion in being a leader, not only in economic catching up, but leader at the technological frontier? And what are the key parts of the recipe that will keep Poland successful, that will rejuvenate European economy, and that will also keep the global economy stable? So I will have a number of questions, and one more thing I want to say. We'll have another guest, Mr. Minister Marcin Przydacz, who will join us in about a couple of minutes from now. He's the Chief International Relations Advisor to the President of Poland, Mr. Nawrocki, who will join us later on, and I will ask him some follow-up questions. Let me start by introducing quickly our panelists. Beata Javorcik, our fellow Polish compatriot, the chief economist of EBRD and professor of economics at Oxford University, the first woman ever to be a professor of economics at Oxford, if I am right. Statutory professor. So I think this is historical. We have Martin Wolf, the guru of global economic commentary, and obviously the chief economics commentator at Financial Times, and an author of a book on the crisis of democratic capitalism, which he published in 2023, which I think many would argue was prescient in terms of what we are seeing right now. And Martin, far too optimistic, and I hope we'll elaborate on it as we go along. Yes, and we have Jaromír Zettelmeyer, the head of Bruegel, the most prestigious and arguably the most powerful think tank in Europe, based in Brussels. He used to work at the IMF, I think at the same time where I was also at the IMF before joining the World Bank. He has also been a fellow economist at EBRD, so all these type of connections. And Martin graduated from Oxford. So I think there's a reason we have all these three participants here. So let me get started by first, and I'll try to find some time later on for questions from the audience. So please get yourself ready. Who asked the best question? I might offer you a gift, the book that actually talks about the drivers of Poland's success and what it would likely take, at least pre-Trump, for this success to continue. So let me get started by asking Beata, in a nutshell, we talk about Poland's success. It's a country that was the fastest growing large economy. Lithuania was growing fast, but it's arguably significantly smaller. Poland has increased its GDP per capita PPP by 3.5 times over the last 35 years. Over the last 3 decades plus, it has grown faster than even East Asian tigers, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore. Now Poland is, what I would argue, living through its golden age. It's at the 80% of the level of income in the European Union. We have never been that close to the West in more than 1,000 years of the country's history. So what happened? What happened over the last 35 years? What were the critical drivers of this success? And then we'll discuss whether these drivers are still relevant. Beata.
Well, thank you, Martin. Thank you for having me here. So Poland is a poster child for a successful transition. And let me mention just 3 factors that allowed it to achieve this spectacular success. First, EU accession as an anchor. Early on, when the decision was made to pursue EU accession, it eliminated the discussion about what needed to be done. There was a ready recipe, what steps needed to be followed, and that made it impossible to derail the reform process. Second, the boldness and speed of the reform. Reforms create uncertainty. People don't know whether they will win or lose as a result of changes, so just in case they tend to vote for status quo. But because the reforms were so comprehensive, so bold, and done so fast, it was easier to introduce them in the first place, and it was very hard to undo them. The third underlying factor is transfer of knowledge from abroad through international trade and foreign direct investment. Everybody always focuses on how much money FDI brings, on the number of jobs created, but the real benefits of AI come from knowledge, from technology, from management techniques, marketing techniques. And Poland was an enormous beneficiary of those transfers, and that sped up the catching up process.
All right. Very good, Beata. Thank you. I'll come back to you with a couple of questions, but let me turn it on to Hadomin to this. Yes. Thank you. To what extent the EU has indeed been the key drivers of Poland's success, and going forward, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are aware that there's quite a lot of people in Poland, but also even more significantly across the EU, that are arguing, despite Brexit, that leaving the EU would be the way to go forward. These countries can take decisions on their own. Let's be sovereign again. Let's take back control. So to what extent EU has really played a role, and to what extent, how would you respond to people saying, let's Polexit, let's leave the EU. The EU is stagnating and slow and sclerotic anyway. We can do better on our own. What do you think?
So two points. First, backward-looking. So I think EU accession, like Beata already said, has played a really important role in Poland's past success. Why? For 2 reasons. It provides a political commitment device to basically build Western-type political institutions, because you want to be in that rich club. But it also works from the other side, which is the second point that Beata made. So we argued about 15 years ago in a paper I wrote while I was at the BRD at that time, that the type of integration that benefited Poland through the FDI and trade channels that Beata argued could not have happened without the EU anchor. And the reason is that the expectation at that time that Poland would join the EU led companies in the West, and particularly financial sector companies in the West, to make longer-term commitments. And so this was an important reason. Now, we also know it's not the only reason, because we had EU accession of a whole bunch of countries, but these are precisely the peer group of countries that, as you showed in your book, did less well than Poland. So Poland clearly had something beyond just EU accession. And I would agree with Beata, and I think also what you write in your book, that it must have something to do with the type of transition that Poland had very early on, right? So I remember listening to Jeff Sachs very early on in the 90s, and he made unfortunately he's gone slightly mad in the meantime, but he made a really persuasive point, which is you need to get reforms going before new vested interests can form, right? So you made the point in your book that communism, in a sense, had a cleansing effect. It removed the old pre-war vested interests. But the problem with, but that, of course, that experience was shared by all transition economists. They all came from a communist tabula rasa. The big difference between Poland and the others is that most of the other formerly communist countries had time to rebuild vested interests based on the managerial class of the communist political system. And in Poland, transition was so fast that that didn't happen. And so you essentially jumped, you leapfrogged the process that was taken much slower. Now, to answer your question now, the big challenge now is how long can you draw on this historic achievement, right? Does it at some point, how long will it carry you, right? And so I think there's a reason to be optimistic and reason to be more worried. The reason to be optimistic is that I think that the nature of that transition is baked into current political and economic institutions in Poland, right? And so in that sense, it's going to serve you well even in the future. The reason to be a little less optimistic is that turns out that these are the same types of economic and political institutions that are shared by advanced European countries that are not doing particularly well. And so, for now, it's hard to say whether the reason why Poland is growing is because there is something in Poland's secret sauce that goes beyond those types of institutions that you described in your book and will continue to carry it possibly beyond Germany, for example, in per capita income, or whether it's still the catch-up effect. So it's too early to tell what's going on here. But what Poland should be very careful about is that, just getting to where advanced Europe is not enough, because advanced Europe is quite heterogeneous. I mean, there are basically countries that are much better than others. Sweden did best in terms of productivity growth. Denmark is doing best, very well. Switzerland has done very well, even though it was not in the EU, but it has very close ties. Germany, not doing so great. And so if I look at this group of countries, Poland has some features that make it look a little more like Switzerland. Or Denmark. It has arguably a more liberal system than Germany. It has other features that make it look a lot more like Germany. For example, you have a pay-as-you-go social security system. You have a demographic problem, which is as big as Germany's. Right. You have a fiscal issue. So in that sense, it's not completely clear on which side of this European divide you're going to end up, and you have to be careful. Sure.
Lovely. Thank you. Again, warm welcome to Minister Marcin Przydacz, who just joined us in our debate. He's the Chief Foreign Policy Advisor to the President of Poland. We've been discussing a little bit about the drivers of Poland's success and the role of the EU. And perhaps right off the bat, I can ask you, how worried are you about the future of the European Union, particularly in terms of its economic development? How will it affect Poland's prospects? And what can Poland do as a poster child of European success to rejuvenate European economy, to make Europe have cards again?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I'm very, very sorry for being late. I was just accompanying my president during his talks with the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, and it's supposed to be a bit longer than it should be, which is good, but a good political signal. The Netherlands are very important partners for us, partners and allies. I'm very delighted to hear that you are discussing the success story of Poland, being a citizen of this country, and basically the first generation which can profit the prosperity of Poland. I'm very happy to hear that your opinion and you talking about this success. I'm not an economist, so my perspective would be rather political than my expertise is just different. What I wanted to draw your attention to is that this success is based not only on you're probably discussing productivity, education, a good legal system, the fact that we entered the EU market, But let's start with the first thing, which is the security of Poland and the stability of this country, which was not the case for the last couple of hundreds of years. So any next generation, which was very much in terms of ethics, in terms of ambition, very much dedicated to build something. Unfortunately, after 20 years, the war, the invasion of Russia, Germany, or Sweden mentioned already, other neighbors destroyed everything, right, in Poland. So we had to rebuild the economy from the scratches again. This is the first moment in a history of 300, 400 years that for the 35 years we have peace and stability. We are the part of the united Europe, of transatlantic family, and that's the foundation for building anything, because without this we could be the best educated people, and the best educated people from the insecure countries, what they do, they emigrate. And that was the case for Poland for the last 200 years. That's why we need to acknowledge the fact that that was the foundation, and we need to do any possible steps to preserve the regional, European and the global security architecture, which we are profiting from as Poland. The other country which is profiting.
So what do we do with Greenland?
Yeah. The other country, I'll tell you, I'll take this question. The other country which is profiting even more from the current security architecture is People's Republic of China. But the goal of China is completely different. We want to preserve it. China wants to reshape it, let me put it diplomatically, right? With Greenland, I'll take this question and my answer will be purely diplomatically. I'm pretty sure that our two allies, the biggest ally, which is the US, and very important neighboring ally in Denmark, they will find a way, diplomatic solution in their talks, and that would be my answer to this. I acknowledge the fact that geopolitically, from the security matters, Greenland is very important for the North Atlantic continent, but the international law must be observed. That's at least my position. We, as not the superpower, Poland, we are not in favor of the concept of superpowers. In the 19th century, that was the case in Europe. We have not profited that much from that. So,
put it euphemistically, yes.
So that's why we believe that for countries like Poland, the international law should be the instrument which we should use in any case, and that's we said it publicly many times. About Europe, just briefly, we are, as Poland, and being the conservative politician or the representative of the conservative family, we are happy with the fact to be a member of the EU. Don't believe in any disinformation that we are anti-European. But we are quite realistic about Europe. Europe is good, but it's not perfect. It could be always better, somehow cured in those challenges which are stopping us, or which are there is a risk of destroying the good project. The founding fathers of the EU were rather Christian Democrats, and what they believed in is that the cooperation of free nation and free countries, so the attempt of centralization and over-regulation, that the Commission will be deciding about everything without the proper democratic mandate, that's the thing we are not very much a big fan of, at least until the moment there will be the European demos. There is no European demos at this moment. There are nations, Germans, Poles, French. We are all Europeans, but first we are nation states. So that would be the thing. How not to destroy it? To go back somehow to the roots and to try to concentrate on economic cooperation rather than giving to our fantastic European bureaucrats even more power to regulate. And I'm pretty sure that businessmen who are here, I know, would be very much in favor of that approach. Less regulations, more freedom for business, and to fight this attempt of domination. We do know from the history that there are some countries on the European continent which has this sense of domination, and we need to educate them properly, not to fuel this sense of domination, rather to limit it. And we all know what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me turn it to Martin now, who has lived through the Nixonian moment, the big change in global and American economic policy in the 70s. I understand you were there then in DC. And now apparently we are living through the Trumpian moment. So how different, how better or worse this moment is, and what does it mean for countries like Poland that has benefited from an open global architecture, from a liberal economic system that allowed for trade and investment and knowledge transfer almost with everyone. So is it the new world? Is it much worse than what it used to be in the 1970s?
So is this working? Yes. Yep. So in terms of what I want to say, I would like to take the privilege of addressing one or two of the questions you raised, because they link very directly with what happens now. So you've asked, why was Poland so successful and can it continue? And I think Yeremin particularly set out some of the concerns, and I can go into those further. But I have a bit of personal history here. There are advantages in being very old, and there are disadvantages. In this case, there are advantages. So we won't take
age against you, as Ronald Reagan once.
I was the chief leader writer of the FT when Poland liberated itself, when the new reform government appeared. And I wrote a leader at that time, and Beata will be amused by this. The theme of the leader, I can't remember the headline, was, if you're faced with a chasm and don't have a bridge, the only thing you can do is jump. And so it was very strong argument to do exactly what they did. You have to shift all the expectations immediately. And later, visited Warsaw not very shortly afterwards. I had very long conversations, because it was obviously a sensible thing for him to do, because I was going to write a big feature in the FG with Leszek Balcerowicz, who became a very good friend of mine and remains so. And it was clear he was going to do this. And so I was wildly enthusiastic, and I thought they were doing the right thing. And that leads me to the performance side. I just want to make one point here, which is relevant. I don't quite represent reproduce the numbers you had, but it's pretty close. So I'm going to start in 95, because there was lots of shock around the crisis about the thing. But in 95, Poland had real GDP per head at PPP on the numbers I have, which I suspect the conference board. And in 2025, it was 62%. That is a dramatic transformation. And as far as I can see, the only country that has surpassed that in Europe is Lithuania. And I think we can reasonably say it's a pretty small open economy, and it isn't quite representative. It's extraordinary. And I want to contrast it, because it's relevant to later arguments, with a country that then looked much more promising to most of us, Hungary. I won't talk about the Czech, that's another, but Hungary, I think, is interesting. It has wider implication for it, which was 39%, and it's now 54%, and it's done particularly badly in the last 10 or 12 years. So that's relevant to what is required now. Why did Poland do so well? Apart from the openness and economic stability in the EU, another thing that I think seems to me important, looking at it from outside, is a remarkably entrenched bipartisan consensus on economic policy. And I want to stress that, because I think that one of the concerns I have is, will this be sustained in this new era? And one of the speakers here can address this. So what it shows above all is, in the right environment, with the right markets, the right people, the right openness to investment, a huge market, catch-up growth can be incredibly fast. But that's very important. Catch-up growth is not the same as continuing. So what are the threats? There are four, and I will then go to conclusion. The first, pretty obviously, is we're moving to a world environment which I've described in a recent column, which I particularly liked, as neo-mercantilist. The roots of it are nationalism, power, and the use of economic policy for those purposes. So I actually think the idea that we can rely on the EU being a purely economic model while every state has its own national and nationalist view, it may not work. In fact, my suspicion is it won't. But that's a really big bet. The second, and it's pretty clear, as I argued again in another column today, I think the whole economic system of the world is in the process of a revolutionary transformation. So we cannot assume that what made this possible will continue globally, and for the EU, this is a crisis. The second point links to that. There are many different nationalist forces in Europe, EU. Some are more sensible than others, some are really quite sensible, and some are really quite hostile to the EU. And so we cannot assume that these forces within Europe will necessarily be benign. And one of the really big questions is which side Poland end up on that. The third issue, which is really intriguing, a number of countries have a pretty big split between what we tend to call center, liberal, old-fashioned people like me, and people who are broadly defined as right-wing populist. And most of us think peace is right-wing populist. The interesting thing, and the flag bearer of regimes of that kind, which have been entrenched for a long time, is Hungary, which is why I refer to it. And it's been an economic disaster. The interesting question to me for the future of Poland is, can this split in national ideology, if you like, be combined with the continuing commitment to the incredibly successful economic model in all its facets? And I think that's a fundamental question. The final question I would make is, once you're at about 2/3 of US GDP, things get difficult for everybody. I won't give you the relative positions of all the other EU countries when they started slowing really rapidly, but it wasn't wildly far from that. Japan has been backsliding for 25, 30 years. Italy, I won't even go into, it's obvious. You can just decline, because what made it possible to get to this is completely different from what is required to get beyond it. Essentially, if you want to get particularly beyond 70, 75, 80, you have to an economy that is being driven, in my view, by indigenous and endogenous innovation. And that's a different process from the catch-up phase. Poland has, I think, exceptional opportunity in this regard, but do not assume that the economy that got you to this point will necessarily continue like that. It will, and this is my very last remark, this is a quote I had in something else, the famous Lampedusa remark, if you want things to stay the same, everything has to change.
Yes, well said. Thank you. Picking up on the last note, that once you get to 2/3 of the U.S. level of income or productivity, things get different. So, Beata, what would Poland need to do to indeed move from being a champion of catching up to being a champion of being a leader and truly be an advanced economy? And how, being a chief economist of EBRD, what are the lessons learned from this whole experience when you go to Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan and elsewhere? What is it that you would share with these countries that they can emulate from Poland's example?
Lots of questions in one, so let me start with the first one. So I think, 2026 looks like a year of upheaval, a turning point, a year where the old global order is being upended, and we are going towards a brave new world, and we don't know yet what it's going to look like. And the challenge for policymakers is how to be able to deal with the urgent while not losing sight of long-term challenges, right? And that's the key. And the long-term challenge is how to switch the growth model to a model based on innovation. At the EBRD, we look at the list of 2,000 companies with largest global R&D spending. Not a single Polish company There are only 2 companies from the region, one from Slovenia, one from Hungary, both in pharmaceuticals, right? How do we get our companies there? Second, demography. In our latest transition report on demography, we show that aging of the population is going to shave off almost half a percentage point from growth in GDP per capita, right? And that's going to happen in the next quarter of a century. Almost half a percentage point. That's a lot. That's going to erode our living standards, right? Birth rates are falling. One of the most striking statistics to me is that among baby boomers, when they were in the mid-30s, 80% of them were married. I'm talking here about Eastern European EU member states. Among millennials, it's 50%. A Polish woman born in the 1960s, had a 10% chance of being childless. Essentially, only 1/10 of Polish women born in the 60s were childless. Among those born in the 70s, it's 20%. Right? These are really big changes, and it's very difficult to address them. Yes, AI can help, but it's not going to do the trick. Migration is going to help, but if you really wanted to counteract these trends with migration, the levels you would need to have would be on the order of 1 percentage point of today's population coming every year. Politically unsustainable. So what's left? Greater female labor force participation and people working longer. Now, can you think of a more toxic topic politically than increasing pension age, right?
Minister Przydacz will tell us, explain it all.
And then the third challenge is, defense. In this brave new world, we need to spend more on defense. And how do we use that spending to stimulate competitiveness? Let me stop here.
I ask you 2 questions, and I apologize because indeed they were long. One is on the challenges going forward, but any lessons learned? So if you go to Kyrgyzstan or Bolivia or elsewhere, and then you tell them, Poland has been successful, Lithuania, a lot of these other countries, but is it really relevant? It's all the EU story. Which part of the story of the success of these countries you think can be transferred outside of the EU context? Look at Denmark. 100 years of 2% growth per year.
You'd be doing great if you maintain that for the next 30 years.
True. All right.
But there are sort of no silver bullets, right? You want macroeconomic stability. You want growth that benefits a wide share of the population, because if there is one thing we learned over the last 30 years is that if there is no support among the society, reforms will not last. You want to be bold and you want to act fast. So in many ways, looking at what was done by Leszek Balcerowicz is something that still matters today and provides lessons.
Thank you. Before I go to Minister Przydacz, let's be just and have 2 questions to Heromín. One is, what do we do with Europe? I mean, Poland's been successful because it leveraged, maximized all the benefits of the EU, and it was a win-win. German exports have apparently increased by 80 times exports to Poland over the last 35 years, and now the German exports to Poland are now larger than German exports to China. So I think this is a textbook example of a win-win. But Poland's future, as much as it can be successful within the EU, because it's more competitive still than others, the EU might not get there. So what are the parts of the equation, perhaps also going beyond the Draghi report, which you think are really critical? And second simple question, how do we defend Greenland?
Okay, so I think Poland is unique in particularly now, before the background of the question of how should it position itself vis-a-vis the EU, right? It's sort of useful to maybe start from the UK. So Poland is unique in the following ways. If you compare it, say, to where the UK was in the pre-Brexit era. So first, there is not even a plausible story, which for the UK turned out to be a wrong story, but you could make a plausible story that Poland has a global alternative based on some past empire, or its position as, the Singapore of Europe, or an offshore financial market or something like that, that would make it succeed outside the EU. I mean, such a story doesn't exist for Poland, and this is the reason why we have the political consensus on the EU in Poland, in spite of its high political polarization. Second, what matters in the EU matters enormously for Poland because of this high degree of integration. Third, and this is what really makes it special, Poland has big influence on the EU. It is one of the big players, and it's the only big player from the transition region. And so what Poland should do is to push for integration, and it should use its leadership role both to improve the single market, and then to push for a model of the EU for, if you like, reform, even at the level of large countries, that maintains flexibility, right? So at this point, Poland is at this juncture not only for itself, but it can also use its position to, in effect, push for the types of the reforms that the Draghi report proposes, but it will only do that if it can really double down on its EU membership rather than try to, be in its own sphere at the edge. And I'm afraid that over the longer term, Euro membership is probably part of that equation. So not something we need in the very short run, but eventually.
You didn't respond on Greenland, but I'll keep it to what you wanted.
Well, my comment, but just it's one very quick point, and I mean, I hope the minister will address it. I'm assuming, and I think what you have to assume, that the relation between the US and NATO and Europe, therefore, is changed fundamentally, and therefore Europe has to take charge of its own defense to a very significant degree. I'm leaving aside the possibility that within the next 3 days we'll be at war with the United States, but it's non-zero. Now, Poland probably has a greater interest in the outcome of those decisions, for reasons I don't need to explain here, than any other country, given your position, and has already been referred to. You have a problematic neighbor. Yes. Big time. So, while...
Not Germany, yeah, we mean the other neighbor.
I won't go into the remarks made by certain Polish politicians about
like
Germany, which I regard as the craziest remarks made by any national leader until the daily remarks of Mr. Trump. Now, but okay, we know this. So one of the really deep questions Poland has to ask is, the Europeans, however structured, have to become an effective security power. They clearly have the resources because they are going to have to be able credibly to balance the nuclear armed power to your east. This is a very scary situation. I can't see any way that can be done without a significant enhancement of integration in the security sphere, which of course includes military forces beyond that which NATO has generated.
Thank you.
And I will be very interested in the minister's comments on that.
That's exactly what we're gonna do now. I'll have two questions, but first one is, how do we build this effective security power in Europe for the first time since, I guess, the Second World War?
Very simple answer. We need to invest more in our security. We need to spend much more money in security, but not only through the instrument of purchasing very good capabilities, very good weapon from all over the world, but at least to try to build
Meaning America.
at least try to build our own production. But to do that, we need to first come back to the discussion whether do we have the steel factories, for example, do we have other resources to rebuild the defense industry, and then we are back to the discussion what kind of economy we want to have in Europe, only based on services, as we discussed it with Professor a couple of days ago, or we want any production. Again, being on the center right, I would love to have this discussion in Europe. Then we need to get back the production to Europe, not only based on the production which is in China, India, and other Asian countries. That will cost us, of course. They will probably limit also our comforts, because, of course, it's much better to be a AI specialist or a politician, for example, and it's not that fantastic and comfortable job to be in a steel factory, but it is a case we need to discuss. Second thing, we need to leave all the illusions that we will be only a good example of a green policy. I'm very much in favor of some changes with regard to that. Also, being a Christian, the nature is very important for me by my ethics, but it doesn't mean that we need to cool down our economy only because of a kind of green ideology. And we need to stop, maybe not stop, but the process is just too fast. I mean, and there is no reason for that, having in mind that other big economies are not doing the same in the same time and with the same speed. I do remember 5-7 years ago, 2 years before the Russian aggression on Ukraine, the discussion in NATO that our European tanks are polluting the atmosphere, that we need to work on that, more green tanks, which shows also that that this discussion was a bit, we were too far with regard to that. So my simple answer is invest more. Come on, after Newport 2014, it took more than a decade to reach 2% of GDP on our security. And we need to have a war, conventional war, Russian aggression on Ukraine, people being killed on the streets, that some of our allies understood, okay, now is the time that we need to spend a bit more. Now we have this benchmark or the goal, 5%, but again, for the next decade, while other superpowers are investing much, much more in security. So yes, it all depends on the political decision, but I'm a politician, you asked me about difficult questions, how to address them. First, I need to feel at least a bit of support from the public opinion, because I'm not, I don't like suicide. I don't want to go to the public with some fantastic ideas where I know nobody will support me. Of course, the leadership is also about proposing something bold, but then elites, leaders in opinion, should work on that in educating people that this is the right direction. That's why we need to talk to our people. Let's spend more on our defense, because we cannot be dependent only on the final comment. Poland is the most pro-Atlantic country, pro-American country, probably in the EU. We love America because of some values, because of many things, because of the history. But one reason is, the most important probably is that we do know that in case of something, in case of Russian aggression on Poland, at least the US has the capability to defend us. It's not only about the political decision, but at least if they want, they can do it. We are not that sure that other European allies are capable to follow this example.
Sure. A second quick question before I turn into the audience for questions. So what about consensus of economic policy? Martin, Beata, Heronim were mentioning that this consensus has been a key part of Poland's success. We knew what we wanted. We knew what we wanted to get into the EU, NATO, OECD. We wanted to be part of the West. We wanted to be in G20 now. We want to be in John 20. We'll be in Miami, getting some nice suntan in December when it's warm. But do you think we have the consensus now? I mean, some of people in the audience might know that Poles have now perhaps become more argumentative than even the Indians, and I'm based in New Delhi. We actually have 2 Polish houses this year in Davos for the first time ever. We have this Polish house, and next door, 100 yards from here, we have the second Polish house. So the golden age is there. The question is, are we capable of sustaining economic consensus and economic policy that will continue to help us to grow and become truly as powerful as Germany, France, and others?
So we have 2 houses in Davos since we joined G20. So imagine how many houses we'll have if we join G7. Yeah? But yeah, I think there is consensus, to be honest. I mean, with regard to the main questions which are ahead of us. Of course, they could. I mean, we are divided as every democratic state. There is a lot of division. Of course, some may be more liberal, less conservative. Other are rather to the right. But in terms of the economic model, yes, we are very much, I think, in line. Also with the government, although the right-wing parties are in opposition, there are some slight differences. I mean, for liberals, they are rather focusing on big cities because the electorate is there, and they believe that they should answer the questions. I mean, and the expectations of their for the conservatives is rather the countryside. So they are rather concentrate on infrastructure, not to leave people behind. Not because it's easy to live in Warsaw, to manage your life in Warsaw. But when you are living somewhere in the countryside, it's not that the color of rose. So there would be the differences. Of course, the fight with corruption, we are quite successful. That was rather the right-wing party which was successful in this. But the liberals, they are continuing this process of limiting possibilities for corruption. The oligarchization, that's not the case of Poland, although in other Central European countries, you've seen that. And both sides of this political dispute agreed that, okay, oligarchs are not, this is not the best way to develop country. Of course, there are some differences with regard to the EU. I think that the right wing would rather go to the roots, as I previously said. The left wing would say, no, we should follow whatever Brussels says, whatever Berlin says. We do believe it's not a perfect policy to be conduct. So differences are there because it's natural in democracy. But when it comes to the strategic goals, security first, development second, and the prosperity, these would be the goals for all the politicians in Poland. Of course, we have this far right party, but it's really hard to understand what do they really want now. I mean, they're still figuring out what would be the goal for them.
Sure, thank you. Let me open it up to the audience. If you can quickly introduce yourself and have a brief question or a comment, please. Anyone?
Everything is clear.
Everything's clear. So yes, there's someone in the back, and we will come back here.
My question would be, what would you say, sir, Władysław Kastoriuk, I represent the community of Polish entrepreneurs in San Francisco. What would you say is the bottom-up things we could do to strengthen our economy for the next for the next generations, so we can compete on the highest levels and never stop?
There's a question to who?
Martin.
To Martin, yeah. I think it's to Martin and Beata, another panelist.
I think it's for Beata because she follows this. That when anybody says that to me, what he is really saying is, why are you still around? You should have retired long ago. Now the answer is, I can make general comments, not specific ones. I'm very clear that that I don't have sufficient knowledge. But if I look at the places that have been, I think European countries, broadly defined, have a problem. I'll make 2 points. There are many more because it's a very big and complex area. This is a point Paul Krugman has made, who is, apart from his politics, with which I largely agree, but that's not the point, is a really big guru on economies of agglomeration, so forth. And he makes the argument, if you look at the frontier innovation in the most dynamic big sector of the world, which is now obviously digital, broadly defined, it appears you have astoundingly powerful economies of agglomeration. And it's therefore, he argues, not an accident that the countries with the biggest integrated markets for everything are doing so well. And my view is, you get a center like Silicon Valley, which dominates America and then the world. And one of the questions raised by the Draghi report is, if every country wants its own Silicon Valley, you've had it. And how do we, and this is linked, a comment I make very briefly, I'm sorry, but I think the same is true of the arms industry. Yes. The most important thing is to forget having national arms industries. I actually think you have to forget having national armies, but certainly every little country in Europe can't have an effective army that will be of any use in this situation. So we have to integrate more, while I'm wildly in favor of Britain rejoining. I've made this very clear. The second, there are really big questions. The second is, obviously, if you look at innovation where it's gone successfully, you need very powerful links with universities, and universities which are generally creating frontier ideas. You have businesses that are plugged into and building their work on frontier innovation. This is where Switzerland, that's why I mentioned Denmark, Sweden to some extent, have been so successful, and they're small. They have to be completely plugged into the world market to do this. I see no reason why Poland shouldn't be able, but it might, and then there really is, I think, government support often needed, or a link between the government and the private sector to create really functioning venture capital models, which for small countries, and by the way, we're all small, except China and the US, is a big, big challenge. I can see this in Britain, because we've got some of the other things. So you really have to say, this is a different world now. You have to do things differently from the way you did in that stupendously successful catch-up period. And for me, that's the most important lesson of what I'm seeing. By the way, the Koreans are now struggling with this, really struggling. And they were the frontier, a lot of technology. They are finding challenging the US and China now frighteningly difficult.
Thank you. Beata, bottom-up growth.
Poland will have succeeded if 5 or 10 years from now, we all meet here and there will be many people like you, but they will be representing the Polish startup scene, not the Silicon Valley. That's what we should be aiming for. And Poland is large enough that it could pull it off. And young people like you can help this happen. So we are counting on you.
Can I follow up? So we are trying to do that. But how to use our very complex economy? Poland has a very complex, very high in the complexity index to do what you have said.
Well, there is a minister here. He can connect you to the right people.
There it is. That's the bottom line. That's the Davos network.
Meeting, yeah.
Yes. That's why we all go to Davos, so we can actually see people that otherwise are based in Warsaw. Anyway, we're a couple of any more questions or comments from the audience? There's one last one, and I'll turn it back to you for concluding remarks for a couple of minutes. Mr. Minister,
I will
very
have
quickly.
a question to my colleagues.
Okay, good. All right, go ahead.
Very briefly, my name is Steve Carlton, and I'm from Denmark. So you know.
There you are. We want to be like you.
I asked that question several times during the very interesting discussion. No one has commented. What is your take? I mean, in Denmark, we follow this because we believe in world order from the past. And we don't know, we know that Greenland with the states have had since 51 given the states total freedom to do whatever they want militarily in Greenland. And at some point in time, 20 years ago, they had 10,000 people there. Now they have 200. Who has actually looked away from defending the Arctic and Greenland? What is your take? What should we do? We might even have a terrible situation this afternoon or tomorrow.
Sure. Thank you, which allows me to actually go back to my second question to Heroin that he missed answering. Greenland and Denmark, please.
Look, I basically completely agree with you. I think that if we now react the same way that we reacted to the first tariff threat in Turnberry, we are really completely losing any credibility. We're essentially inviting ourselves to be bullied in the future, we will totally become a vassal state. I also think the arguments that are made on the side of the US and that were repeated by Scott Bessent here yesterday are completely specious. So the argument is they need to have it to properly protect the Western world from the Russians and the Chinese. And of course, they could completely do this within the current system. We all know there's an existing Cold War treaty. You can lease as many bases to the Americans as they want. So this is all absurd. We should draw a line in the sand. And we should retaliate unless they drop the tariff threats by the end of the month.
Last comment and question from Minister Przydacz.
It won't be the comment, it will be the question, really, as a politician and decision maker. I'm seeking for a proper answer to the demographic question. You've mentioned that that's the challenge, and I would really love to learn a bit from your perspective. What could we do, having in mind that looking at the map of free market liberal democracies, every single country has problems with demography, that we are dropping our population, and having in mind that we are not big fans of uncontrolled migration because that creates other tensions, other problems. We need to really take care of our demography. So, and the question is, can we do it only through the economic instruments, decisions, or do we really need to think about some cultural changes? And I'm not thinking about putting back women to homes. That won't be the case, but any kind of promoting families, because without family it would be very difficult to have kids, right? Are there any good answer to this
One last minute, then we have to wrap up. Yeah. Beata.
No quick fixes. Essentially, fertility policies bring birth forward, do not change the total fertility rate. But we have a whole report on demography, and we'll be happy to share it with you.
All right, that's Martin. Last concluding remarks, 10 seconds each.
I'm not really, but I have 3 children and 6 grandchildren, so I'm doing my little bit.
Well done, well done. I have 3, so.
I have 4.
I have 4, yes.
Okay, well, you're doing. So good. I think the most interesting question is why, because obviously there's lots of economics, the change of women, but why do these young people feel that the idea of being married, which to me has been an unimaginable blessing for 55 years, is so repellent? And that, to me, is the most profound and astonishing social change of my entire life.
A big topic for the next debate, yes.
And we really ought to think about this properly as societies, and no, we're not going back to the 1950s.
And I think after this, the discussion should be over.
Yes, I think this is it. Let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you for all the discussions on demographics, on how to get to Denmark without being in the position of Greenland. Thank you very much.